Good afternoon, class. Welcome back. We're going to pick up where we left off today as we were talking about the Micmac and particularly their worldview and how it impacted and related to their relationship with their natural environment. And I'm going to move fairly quickly because I want to get through at least briefly to a few different things here. I have some slides to show you. So please pardon the pace and do know that you can always pause or go back and do things that will better accommodate your pace of absorption as we proceed here. So we're talking a little bit about the ritual or ritualized killing that the Micmac practiced, and it's largely a part of their relationship and the way that they saw themselves as members of a larger ecosystem and a larger society of natural species or natural beings. And so the Manitou, which is the spirit that's evident in each individual organism, has an important role to play that gives the Micmac people pause before they enter into the act of taking or killing, claiming another life. And if they've done this well, if they've practiced the rituals, they've observed the taboos, and they have sort of prepared themselves for that moment of exchange, meaning that moment perhaps when you look that animal in the eye and prepare to take its life, then you are rightful in taking that animal's life. And the relationships, the act of taking that animal's life will not affect the future relationship or the future abundance of taking the lives of additional members of that animal people, as it will inevitably prove necessary to do. So there we have it, and this is essentially a snapshot of the Micmac people and their relationship with their natural environment on the eve of their contact with the French. So in the 1500s, in the early 1500s, we actually have our first documented instances of European, mostly fishermen, who have very sporadic and limited contact with the Micmac people off the east coast of southeastern Canada. But what happens in the early decades of contact is what oftentimes happens between people who are curious about each other. Initially, there's usually a fear or distrust, and so it can be slow to develop, but there's also usually a curiosity that ultimately wins out, and the curiosity and desire to learn about that other ultimately overshadows any distrust or fear, and in this case it results to very limited trade that then turns into greater trade. And of course, with the Europeans who arrive, their unique possession is what Jared Diamond would refer to as his proximate factors. The proximate factors that the Europeans bring are, on one level, disease, which starts to impact and infect the native peoples upon their interaction with the French, but also the commercial products and some of these manufactured goods that the French fishermen and traders can bring in. And these have a transformative impact upon the Micmac people, their modes of production, and also their worldview that is going to be increasingly disrupted. The balance of having one's role and observing the ritual processes for killing, and also for observing the delicate balance between animal peoples and the human peoples that are taking their lives. So as these manufactured goods like knives, axes, fish hooks come into play, increasingly the Micmac can trade pelts, such as beaver pelts, which become one of the main pelts that the French are interested in. And as you can imagine, based on the way in which the Micmac have looked at the world and practiced their relationship with their natural environment, this is going to have tremendous consequences. And as I began to mention in class, part of what drives this European demand for pelts is a growing craze throughout Europe, and that craze is the desire for these beaver hats, these beaver pelt hats. And here are some examples of what some of those looked like. Look at all these different styles. It wasn't just a beaver hat, but the beaver pelt could be fashioned into a whole host of different styles that were keeping with the trends that were developing in Europe and different parts of Europe. And you can see the dates and the styles here. Okay. So what do we have? As the Micmac throughout the 1600s strengthened their ties, or at least strengthened the influence of French encroachment, or French, you could call it a French invasion, but it's really just a growing relationship with the French and aspects of a new mode of production. And in this case, the French mode of production is essentially commercial trade, sort of early expression of capitalism. And in that, we have these manufactured items that come in. Here's a picture of a trap, a metal trap that the French brought to the Micmac. Could have just as easily chosen a firearm or a kettle or a fish hook, that kind of thing. Essentially what this does is the technology that the French bring in contact with the Micmac allows for a greater efficiency in the Micmac's ability to consume their natural environment, and to consume from those populations that previously had been essentially fellow members of an ecosystem. Now those populations, the members of those populations, like the Beaver Nation, are going to become commodities that, if the Micmac choose to, can convert into cash or a valuable transaction that can allow them to buy things. So this cuts on a couple levels. The first level, in which the French introduction of these manufactured goods impacts the Micmac, is it impacts them in terms of their relationship with their natural environment. So now that wealth can be essentially stored, the Micmac are now no longer consuming different animals within their natural environment just based on the changing seasons and the changing, we talked about the menu of opportunities that they have for meeting their needs from a hunter and gatherer mode of production. Now they can, if they choose to, they can harvest a great number of animals in any given season, sell the extra, and convert that extra harvest into storable goods, like what we have here, a metal trap, or fish hooks, or pots, or guns, so on and so forth. So that's one level in which this cuts. The other way in which it cuts is it really violates the trust, in that the bonds that saw the Micmac people treat themselves as essentially members of a community, not a select people or a select species that had dominion or superiority over all others. So we see that the changing nature of the Micmac approach to their natural environment is evident in a few different things. For one, they're going to trap them earlier in the winter because it's kind of easy to trap the beaver earlier in the winter. The problem is that if you trap beaver earlier in the winter, you're also trapping them before they have conceived the next generation. So you're essentially, to use the metaphor of the goose and the golden egg, you're essentially killing the goose rather than just waiting for it to lay its egg that you can harvest indefinitely. So there's a shortcut there. Also, they're going to resort to new strategies to try to increase their harvest of beavers. This is something that would have been, sort of taboo. Trying to trick a fellow species would be to, deal an insult to the dignity of that beaver nation. But here we have the Micmac resorting to this because, hey, if we can increase our harvest, we can also increase our wealth through trade with the French. Other strategies that they use to increase their harvest, all ways in which sort of violate the expectations that had existed in their previous relationship with nature. So here we have epidemics, which also start to find their way into the Mi'kmaq experience as a result of contact with the French. So we have here things like smallpox and diphtheria, typhoid, influenza, all sorts of diseases. These are, again, proximate factors, according to Jared Diamond, that are going to impact the Mi'kmaq. And it's really important to note that really the arrival of the French with their new technology and the arrival of disease, could also say the arrival of the French religion, Catholicism, these three things, disease, religion, and trade, all work simultaneously to undermine the past relationship that the Mi'kmaq had with their natural environment. Because now they have a special incentive, you could say it's even a temptation, to deviate from their past, you could say, restrained or limited harvest of the natural world. Now they can take more if they choose. Also, disease has visited itself upon them in such a way that it does suggest an imbalance, and the sort of overall stability and balance of nature disrupts them. And they also see the arrival of a new kind of worldview that expresses itself in French Catholicism. And they see that in some ways it seems to serve the French better than the religious or the worldview that the Mi'kmaq have. And so what Calvin Martin points out is that there is a process that goes on as a result of the disease and the shift from essentially seasonal hunting and gathering to a new shift to essentially market hunting and gathering for the purposes of trade that transforms Mi'kmaq society. And we're going to use the term apostasy. Apostasy is a process whereby one turns against their previous spiritual beliefs. Okay, so in the case of the Mi'kmaq, the hardship that they experience as a result of the disease and epidemics which they begin to contract after their contact with the French forces them to have this essential crisis whereby their society is falling apart in front of them. And in the midst of a society that's falling apart, it becomes very easy for the Mi'kmaq to abandon their traditional beliefs and their traditional practices, and their honoring the ritualized killing and following the taboos, which was the norm for their society prior to contact with the French in the 1500s. So all of this comes across simultaneously to create a situation where Mi'kmaq society is going to be transformed very dramatically in a rather short period of time. And as the Mi'kmaq abandon their traditional belief systems, this also opens them up. And in fact, the success of the French in some ways makes the appeal of Christianity all the greater. If your enemy's gods are taking better care of your enemy than your gods or your beliefs are taking care of you, then it might start to seem pretty self-evident that you might want to consider your enemy's gods as something that you adopt for yourself. And again, the French aren't necessarily the enemy. The French have, engaged in trade with the Mi'kmaq. But if you take the long view, it's as a result of the French that the Mi'kmaq have begun this long process of cultural decay and ruin, at least the decay of their traditions. So with that, I will stop, and I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow after you have viewed the documentary on the Mi'kmaq called Our Nation. It's posted in right next to this screencast in your Week 2 module. Enjoy. Bye.